What's going on everybody, DiGi Valentine here right about now, and today on Who Dat, I'm going to be reviewing a fox character that is well known for having more than one tail. Yeah. Not that one. Not that one either. Are you serious? What, is there like some sort of category for this or something? Ah, for f***'s sake, man, you're taking a piss. That's not even a real fox. That's not even a real fox, bro. You're taking a piss.
I wanna fly high so I can reach the highest of all the heavens. Somebody will be waiting for me, so I have gotta fly higher, gotta keep going.
Sidekicks have come a long way. Once upon a time, they were mostly designed to make the main characters look good. Now we're seeing sidekicks have more growth and progression with their roles, taking them out from underneath the shadows of their idols. No longer is a sidekick stuck being an inferior version of the real product, the world is just as much their oyster. Tails, the lovable little foxy boy from the Sonic the Hedgehog series, is one such character to be born into the sidekick role. Making his debut in 1992 for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, his cutesy adorable design won Tails the attention of many fans, and then almost instantly lost all of them when he kept losing rings during the special stages. Oh come on, man! There was also this bizarre trend amongst those of you who played this game with an older sibling. Chances are if you were the younger one, your elder would palm off the second control pad to you and say in a patronizing voice, "You can play as Tails." Like, rah, what do I look like, some second-rate waste man? Prick. The joke was always on them though. You knew in your heart you had the sweeter deal because while they kept losing all their lives from running headfirst into badniks, you were the immortal fox sent from the heavens to forever torment their gutter trash gameplay skills. Who's the waste man now? Negative connotations aside, while Tails might have had a bit of a rough start due to annoying siblings or bad AI, as a character, he had potential to become something great if he stuck around long enough, and it's mostly within the last 15 years or so have we really seen him come into his own stride. Before we take a brief look at what it took for him to get here, I'm going to say up front that I'm only focusing on the mainline video game continuity. Spin-off games, cartoons or comic book versions of the character are invalid as far as this video goes, so don't be acting surprised if I haven't covered the possible mental depression he might have been suffering from for all the times he was insulted by Sonic during the Fleetway comic book run. Pixel brain. Also, even though I'm focusing on the video game line of events, I'm only picking a few parts from a few games that I consider to be significant to the points I'm addressing. And on that note, let's get on with it.
You should probably expect spoilers.
Real name Miles Prower, because haha it's a speed joke. Tails earned his nickname due to the fact that he was born with two tails, though the person responsible for actually giving him that nickname is unknown. We're never given a true origin story for the character, with the earliest point in Tails' timeline being the Game Gear game, Tails Adventure, which doesn't do much in the way of building a backstory. Any insight into the Prower family or why Tails is out there in the world on his own has never been explored in the video game continuity. We do technically have an origin story for when Tails first meets Sonic though, so at least that's something to go on. After the events of Tails' adventure, Tails moved to a place called Westside Island because TQ had done a song about it. While living out there, Tails met Sonic and instantly became mesmerized by the Hedgehog's attitude. He admired his speed and began following him around, doing his very best to keep up with him. Tails was a shy kid however. He found it difficult to talk to Sonic, and anytime Sonic noticed him, Tails would become timid. One day, Eggman arrived at Westside Island and was back on his bullshit, threatening to launch a space satellite called the Death Egg, which he intended to use in his bid for world conquest. Sonic and Tails teamed up to stop Eggman, destroying his satellite and saving the world. A strong, reliable bond between the Hedgehog and the Fox had been formed from this brief journey, and from that day forward, the two of them would run together. During the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Eggman attempted to repair his Death Egg and bring the world to its knees once again, but just like before, the Mad Doctor faced defeat. It was through all these early adventures with Sonic did Tails begin to understand the basics of what it meant to be a hero, but he wouldn't really put what he had learnt to use until the events of Sonic Adventure. During the game, Eggman is once again back to doing something stupid by summoning the creature Chaos in another attempt at world domination. Again, we more or less see the same thing with Sonic and Tails chasing after Eggman as they try to stop him, but with one very significant plot detail. As the story progresses towards the latter half, Sonic and Tails are split from one another, relying on Tails to think and act on his own. Now, Tails has had solo adventures before, but nothing on the same scale of urgency. This was Tails completely isolated from Sonic and facing off against Eggman alone, the fate of the whole city of Station Square resting on his tiny shoulders, and the little fox pulled through. He managed to beat Eggman all by himself, much to his own surprise. Didn't mean jack shit by the end of it because Chaos went on a bender afterwards, but all's well that ends well, innit, Tails? Since then, Tails has continued assisting Sonic on many other missions, always being the technical support for when things would get too scientific for Sonic to handle. While various other games in the series kept Tails within this ballpark, it wouldn't be until Sonic Lost World where we would see Tails once again go through another small evolution of character. The main setup for this game sees Eggman controlling a group of creatures known as the Zeti. Due to Sonic's recklessness, the Hedgehog caused Eggman to lose control of the Zeti, resulting in their retaliation, which endangered Tails' life. During the course of the game, we see Tails speak up about his disappointment in Sonic's rash attitude, and although he respects Sonic, he won't make excuses for his sometimes idiotic behaviour. Although everything turns out alright in the end, this might be one of the strongest canonical points within Tails' storyline that shows he has matured enough to speak his mind freely. And then Sonic Forces happened.
Visual design.
As is the case with a large percentage of Sonic characters, their designs are not too detailed and can usually be considered simplistic. That tends to work to their strengths in the sense that less is more, with focus being invested into giving each character a small handful of defining visual traits instead. Sonic's spikes are one such trait, Knuckles' oversized fists are another, and in Tails' case, it's his cigarettes. No, obviously it's the two tails sticking out from his arse, innit? It's in the name. As far as defining traits go, giving two tails to Tails has allowed him to appear more extraordinary, keeping him in tune with Sonic's radical design. The two tails are not just there for show either, as he uses them for numerous tasks. The most notable ability is how Tails utilizes his two tails in a propeller-like manner, granting him the ability to fly for a short time. He also uses this same propeller motion on the ground to help boost him forward, allowing him to keep up with Sonic's casual speed level. On rare occasions, Tails might even use these tails as an extra pair of limbs, showing us that he could likely pull off a decent Goro cosplay if he wanted to. The interesting thing about Tails' design having more than one tail is that it seems to draw its inspiration from ancient Japanese folklore, where a fox is considered more older and wiser the more tails it has, with a maximum number of 9 tails for the oldest and wisest. With Tails only having 2, it highlights his infancy. He's certainly smarter than your average fox, hence the reason he is depicted as having more than just one tail, but he is still young and inexperienced, which is symbolized by the lack of having any more tails than that. It's purely symbolic though, and I doubt Sonic Team would ever start depicting Tails with more tails the older he gets, because that would just be weird, wouldn't it? Though it's not like Sonic Team haven't done anything weird before. Shit, they're gonna end up giving Tails more tails, aren't they? Tails has a few other little things about his appearance that helps to establish a visual identity for himself. These key areas also help to counterbalance some of Sonic's design aspects. Tails' inclusion of white fur on the stomach and mouth areas contrasts with Sonic's, who has smooth peach-coloured patches instead. Sonic's design is presented more sleek and dynamic, showing attitude with its angles. Tails counters this by displaying fluffy bunches of fur, showing us a cuter character with a much softer appearance. This friendly design to Tails is established further by the character having a couple of loose strands of fur on his head, mimicking a slightly scruffy hairstyle. Very innocent and childlike in appearance, it adds to Tails' warm presentation. The use of orange fur also heightens this warmth, offering us a hue that's not as cold as Sonic's. The breaks of white across Tails' body allow the orange to evenly space itself out, so it's not too overbearing or void of any structural depth. You can glance your eyes over Tails' colour palette and feel harmony within it due to the manner in which these colours have been organised in. As Tails grew with the series, like other cast members, certain aspects about their designs changed, though in Tails' case not much has been affected. He was given light blue eyes, which I feel helped to define his facial features a lot stronger now, so that was nice. His limbs had been lengthened slightly, showing us that while he was still one of the smaller members of the cast, he wasn't as short and stumpy as before. I feel the only visual aspect about him that might have become lost over time were the buckles. While the buckles on his gloves remain unaltered, it were the ones on his feet that changed the most. Before, Tails wore blue buckles on his footwear. These were eventually changed to black to fit more or less in line with the same buckles he wears for his gloves. And I mean, that's fine, there's nothing inherently wrong with this, but I just feel they missed out on something here. My personal opinion on it is that when they changed Tails' eyes to blue, it would have been more beneficial to change the buckles on his gloves to blue and kept all of his buckles blue across the board. The light blue from his eyes would have then paired together with the buckles, and they would have then acted as a subtle accent colour to his overall palette. Blue and orange are a colour pairing that work well together. It's partly why Sonic and Tails look great as a duo. For Tails' own appearance, it would have been nice to have let blue feature more in his design, allowing it to assist the orange tones rather than relegate the entire shade to just his iris. But again, it's just a personal opinion. Overall, I really do love Tails' design. His colours are great, his appearance is quite frankly adorable, and despite my minor bit of critique, I don't think I would actually change him at this point in time.
Personality.
In his very early days, Tails was usually quite shy, presenting himself as the more reserved one out of the duo, allowing Sonic's confidence to shine stronger. He was also considered the more polite one out of the two, again allowing Sonic's streetwise attitude to make the Hedgehog appear cooler as a result. These traits were entirely expected of Tails, who sat in that sidekick role, making the main hero look more interesting. That said, Tails did have one unique trait going for him that allowed him to take the higher ground over Sonic, and that was his intellect. Tails is a super smart kid, much smarter than Sonic by a long shot. He's so intelligent for his age that he could be considered somewhat of a scientific prodigy. If he's a genius now, imagine what he could achieve as an adult. His intellect means that while Sonic is the type to act first and ask questions later, Tails is the opposite, always asking relevant questions and making sure they plan their actions accordingly. He's a thinker, and a brilliant one at that. He wasn't perfect though. Being young meant a level of inexperience would cause Tails to make a blunder or two, such as, you know, forgetting to install landing gear into a plane. A plane that flies.
What now?
I forgot to put in the landing gear!
Whoa!
Like, how can you forget to include landing gear in a plane? That's like building a house with no doors and then wondering why you can't go inside the bloody thing. Tails' social interactions were also a little bit unsophisticated too, which could have been down to the fact that he was still just a kid, or his voice actors from back in the day were kids themselves and thus presented him in a really naive way due to inexperience on their part.
I looked up to my grandfather because of all the great things he accomplished in his life. He was my hero, and I wanted to be a great scientist like him. But did he really mean to destroy us?
I don't know, but what I do know is we all did it together!
Yeah, great input there, Tails. Cheers. What made Tails interesting, however, is that he was eager to improve. In Sonic Adventure 1, he acknowledges his inferiority to Sonic, often relying on the Hedgehog for help. He recognizes he has to learn to do things on his own if he is to become stronger. Idolizing Sonic's heroism and positivity meant he would evolve in the right direction. In later years, while his intelligence would naturally continue to grow the more he honed his abilities in science and engineering, he would also develop a more broader personality as well. Hanging around with Sonic not only allowed Tails to earn some maturity with his conversational skills, but he also developed some slight sprinkles of attitude in there too. Clearly, the Hedgehog's own sense of dry wit and sarcasm had rubbed off on the fox.
Truly, your robots are a reflection of your genius, Dr. Eggman.
You will supply the brawn I need to get past the Zeti.
Oh, and you're asking so nice.
Oh man, I should have listened to you, Tails.
Oh, you think?
I really enjoyed seeing Tails act like this. He had grown enough to develop a personality that is a few steps down from Sonic's, allowing him to become a fun and lively character too, without sacrificing his intellect or upstaging the Hedgehog either. Tails' personality was at a really great spot by this point, and then something happened. Namely this. Now before you start kicking out with your initial knee-jerk reactions, please give me a moment to explain what I mean, yeah? Right. For Sonic Forces, Tails had essentially regressed back into a weak, inferior personality. All the strength they had built him up with over the last 10 to 15 years came crashing to a standstill and folded back in on itself. Now granted, there is actually a good and legitimate reason for this happening to Tails. The story set up for Forces is that Sonic is believed to have been killed in battle. While Knuckles takes it upon himself to lead the resistance against Eggman's empire, Tails has essentially had a breakdown and is mentally lost. The emotional impact of believing his best friend to be dead shook Tails to the very core and rid him of all his confidence. And you wanna know what? Rightfully so. If you had been led to believe one of your very best friends had been killed, you too would feel extremely vulnerable. I know I would. So if you're asking me, the fault doesn't lie in this particular direction for his character arc. The fault instead lies in the way it was presented and how SEGA failed to provide consistency to what they said was happening and what they showed was happening. Silver makes a passing comment that Tails has lost it after Sonic's death. Where exactly was that emotion in Tails? I mean, we see Tails, we see him talking about fixing up the robot Omega, and the guy looks honestly quite fine. If Tails had gone off the rails, then I would have expected maybe some incoherent speech, or perhaps a weary, concerned facial expression to highlight the fact that he has been mentally affected, but nah, he just looks like Tails fixing a robot. Standard. Business as usual. The only moment we visually see this insecurity is when the shameless marketing hook appears out of nowhere and attacks him, which results in Tails getting scared. And even then, fair enough. Get scared. If your friend is dead and you have lost your confidence, then you have every right to be frightened. But not without context. Not without showing us why you're acting like this all of a sudden. It doesn't help the fact that Tails is suddenly approached by the other marketing hook, and all of a sudden, he's back to feeling fine now. Even though classic Sonic is not the version of Sonic he had spent his whole life befriending, which now makes it seem like Tails is just trying to compensate the loss of his real friend by befriending a different version of the character. Which really isn't a good message you want to deliver to the kids now, is it? Like, did your pet just pass away? Shit, go and get a new one that looks exactly the same, it's all good, innit? To be fair, the game ends on a positive note for the character, showing Tails back to being his original optimistic self, complete with slight sprinkles of attitude, so hopefully the future will be brighter for him.
Importance.
As I've hammered the point home enough already, Tails began as a sidekick, and sometimes these types of characters don't get a good shot at progressing beyond that stage. Now, technically he still sits in the role of a sidekick because he's usually found running alongside Sonic, but as time has gone on, Tails has nurtured his own traits. With Tails having his own skill set too, it's allowed him to be more unique within their pairing and not just a complete clone of the main hero. With his main strengths being in science and engineering, it further differentiates Tails from his idol Sonic, and it's these skills that has helped Tails excel within the cast. His intellect has allowed them to stay hot on Eggman's heels, and anytime the Doctor hatched a new scheme, Tails would usually have the brain power to figure out a way to combat it. Without Tails there to assist the Hedgehog, Sonic could have likely faced defeat on some of those occasions too. And Sonic doesn't shun these achievements either, recognizing the fact that while he might have the power, he doesn't have the technical know-how, and it's Tails that has been a crucial factor into saving the day in the first place. It must feel pretty good from Tails' angle to receive commendations from the person he looks up to, and if the main hero of the series is giving props to him, then that increases his importance plentyfold. It does feel like Sonic Team intentionally wanted to portray Tails in a more important light too, because during the Sonic Adventure series, they allowed the character to fully shine on his own. With Sonic absent and the fate of an entire city in his hands, the young fox took on Eggman alone and won. He didn't run, he didn't cry for help, he didn't wait for Sonic, he recognized time wasn't on his side and he had to act quickly. And he done so. During Sonic Adventure 2, we see Tails has gained experience from his triumph over Eggman in the previous game and is now taking more direct action. He's using his initiative a lot more by this point. If Sonic is not present to take the lead, Tails will call the shots on the situation. Even when Sonic is around, Tails seems to have more input into what their actions should be. He was granted more voice within the cast, and as such, other characters as well as Sonic take Tails very seriously now. This is further explored during Sonic Lost World when Tails speaks up about how he feels in regards to Sonic's attitude. Though, if I'm being honest, I feel Sega missed an opportunity here to show a real breakdown in bond between Sonic and Tails. They dipped their toe into the topic but never dived in. Towards the end of the game, Sonic has been led to believe that Tails has been turned into a robot and now he was going to have to battle his best friend, but before the fight can even begin, Tails reveals he was just faking it. And I'm like, well, why? Why build up this entire moment only to pussy out at the last minute? For this part in the story, Tails should have been a fully brainwashed robot. Making a playable boss battle out of Robo-Tails would have raised the stakes to new levels that the Sonic series hadn't done yet. Upon defeating Tails and freeing him from the robot suit, it would have allowed the pair of them to appreciate their friendship even more and could have absolutely strengthened them as a team for the future of the series. Instead, Sonic Forces happened. Showing Tails lose all that confidence that it took so long to build would have been another great arc, giving the Fox a shot at dealing with loss, and then how reuniting with his friend would have helped bring the character out of his depression, but they wasted it. A real solid contextual presentation should have been given to us for the character, and because it wasn't, it looks like it was half-assed and inconsistent with all the work Sonic Team had done with Tails since Sonic Adventure 1. I just hope for the character's sake that Sonic Team keep pressing onwards from this point and that they don't regress Tails again for any reason. If they do, they absolutely need to provide depth as to why it's happening. It's called a character arc. Tails could have had two great ones in Lost World and Sonic Forces if only Sonic Team went all cards in from the get-go. It's not a lost cause though. If anything, the fact that Tails is getting any character development at all shows us he's still important to the series, not just because of the hero that he runs around with, but because he's grown enough over time, becoming a hero himself and one that is vital to protecting their world from future threats.
Conclusion.
Tails as a character doesn't do much wrong. In fact, as a character, he does a lot right. He has a great visual design. He was one of the more important cast members to debut in this series, thanks to being a highly intellectual character. And while his personality in the early days might have been something cliched, you can clearly see how hanging with Sonic over time has helped mature him. The only real faults I found with him are not down to the character himself, but the way in which he had been directed by his creators. And even then, it wasn't necessarily bad arcs for the character to take, just that the arcs themselves in execution were underwhelming and lacking any real effort. If you're going to write an arc for your character, you'd better have the motivation to write one that makes sense, contains context, and concludes with a point to leave your audience with. In those regards, I feel Tails fell short. But that's it. He's got every right to be here in this series, and whenever a new game drops, I expect him to be there right alongside Sonic in some capacity. I'm also going to give Tails my Valhalla emblem because there's a level of nostalgia I get from seeing this character. He's also cute as fuck, and foxes are one of my favourite animals, so brrr.
I wanna fly high so I can reach the highest of all the heavens. Somebody will be waiting for me, so I have gotta fly higher. Gotta keep going, everything is alright.
Yo, this episode was brought to you by these wonderful people supporting me on Patreon. Without their help, this show would not be able to continue. If you'd also like to support Who Dat, please check the link in the description. Any and all help would be appreciated. Cheers everybody.